and welcome to the special council meeting of March 25th, 2024. Today's meeting will focus on the capital budget or the capital investment plan, CIP. The meeting is being live streamed on Town of Kentville YouTube channel, and the most up-to-date meeting package is on Town of Kentville website. This meeting is called to order. Have all of the councillors received and reviewed their budget package? Does any member of council have information pertaining to a matter before this council which has not been publicly circulated? The council will be voting electronically on all motions except administrative, which will be a show of hands. The chair has received regrets from Councillor Maxwell, but notes that we do have quorum. As this is a special council meeting, the agenda is limited to the capital budget or capital investment plan and deed transfer tax. If I could have a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. Deputy Mayor, thank you. And Councillor Zabian for the second, thank you. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. All right, we have been provided with a capital, 5-year capital investment plan. I will now hand over the floor to our Director of Finance, and she will walk us through the capital investment plan. As you've had the weekend to look this over, members of council, the Director will be starting at a high level, and if there is any of the sheets that you wish to discuss further, please do so at the time. And if it pleases the director, questions directly to her. You don't have to go through me, and we can do questions as you see them. However, I would ask that you do use your monitors so that we can keep some semblance of order. Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and welcome everybody today. I prepared. Oh, sorry. Is that better, Jennifer?
Yes, much better.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the capital budget, as was noted, had been provided in advance of today's meeting. I will be going through some details of that plan throughout the course of the next hour or so. And I will also try and highlight for you the impact that this has on our longer-term financial stability, which was not detailed necessarily in the memo. So there'll be some new information as well as a recap of what you've seen. So starting with what is a capital budget. So from a capital expenditure point of view, those would be items that would have an improvement or betterment to any of our assets that we currently have, or an acquisition or a major rehab of any existing buildings, equipment, or infrastructure. Generally, a capital expenditure is something that has a life beyond a year. We set a minimum threshold just from an administrative point of view, so we say around $5,000 or more would need to go in as a capital asset if it meets the other criteria. If something is we're spending something just to repair something to get it back to its current operating state, it would be in the operating budget. So there may be things that you're thinking are renovations that might not meet this threshold that you will see in the upcoming operating budget. Okay. Our objectives in pulling this budget together were to consider 3 components. One would be what we are trying to replace and renew. So we have an asset group of assets in multiple programs and services that require us to maintain those at a certain level, but then also to maintain the service that they deliver, which may require reinvestment, renewal, replacement. We also are looking to continue to acquire assets and develop them to enhance our service delivery. And we also want to make sure we're leveraging any financial and provincial funding opportunities. We also want to ensure that if the town and council have priorities, that we are giving those consideration when we look at how we will invest new capital dollars. We also know that there are risks associated with our current infrastructure and how it performs, so looking at it from a risk basis as well. So those are the 3 categories or objectives that we used as we moved forward. As I indicated in my briefing note, we did, as a group of directors, CAO and chief of police, went through the detailed budget process together as a team. We received input from staff through a group staff meeting, through individual conversations with our programs and services. We also had a survey that you've seen the results of within the last few months from our community and residents that we reviewed, as well as any reports or studies that might have been available to kind of inform where we thought our priorities should be for the 24-25 budget year right through to 28-29. I would note, and in the individual capital capital expenditure request forms that we provided, we did assess whether we thought they were high, medium, and low priority. That was done by each individual director or chief for their areas. And then we looked at it as a collective and made modifications where we looked at it overall as a town. We also looked for how it would affect our service. If it was a very positive impact and benefit to service, we would rate it high. If it was going to have a detrimental impact, we would also rate that high. So that, I think, provides some clarity around what those rankings might have been. We also, as I've noted, had to consider compliance with laws and regulations, our health and safety, the impact on the environment, where our assets were in terms of their useful life, and any strategic priorities of council or town programs and departments. So with all of those considerations in mind, we landed at a 5-year capital investment plan that looks to allocate $26,242,694 over 117 projects. For this upcoming fiscal year, we are at 46 projects and a capital allocation of $7,726,825. 24-25 does include those amounts that would have not concluded in 23-24, which we'll look at on the next slide, as well as the new ones for 24-25. I have allocated them for your reference between what is an asset replacement and what would be new, and those that we are continuing on over from last year. So there is a significant amount of new asset acquisition and development, which we will see as we move forward, very much leverages us receiving funds from the federal and provincial government at the 73.3% for our green infrastructure and for the ICIP. Okay. We have, I'm demonstrating here where those 117 projects fit within the high, medium, and low ranking. 42 of those are high, 61 medium, and 14 are low. And for this year, just in case you're interested, it is 23 projects at high, 18 at medium, and 5 at low, which is not on the slide, but might be of interest. If we look at the 5-year plan, you can see that we have, you'll see amounts for 2024. Those are projects that we have either forecasted to be incomplete at the end of fiscal 24 that we need to conclude next year, or projects that we didn't get off the ground this year but were pre-approved, were already approved by council in the 23-24 plan that are moved into next year. Or, I think those are the only two words. Yep. Sorry, thinking aloud. Yes, so when you look at them as a percentage, you probably notice that engineering, public works, and planning are over the course of the plan at about 76% of the spend, and for this upcoming year, it's about 89% of the spend. So significant investment there, but also as you are aware, there are opportunities for funding that are embedded within there that kind of makes that seem a bit disproportionate. This slide was all on there earlier today.
Windows phantoms.
Okay, well, we will start with this and then see how I might be able to fix that. So we have, because Parks and Recreation is missing off there. So we do have, you do the, looking at the same 5-year plan, but looking at it by category, so you can see for admin, it's still the 220,000 over the course of the plan. For engineering and public works, though, you do see more of the detail. So as you are aware, we are trying to look at the infrastructure enhancements. So within AT, that would be our funded, the green infrastructure through our active transportation for the most part. So there's large numbers there carried over from this year, which you would have probably recalled from the forecast, investment in next year. On the building side, it's a smaller percentage. It is only around 0.6% of the budget overall for engineering and planning. So not as significant. On an equipment side, there's 9.2% is in there for the overall plan, 7.4% for this year. That is the street sweeper, pretty much, that you approved last year. That will be coming in within 24, 25 would be our hope. And if you go to the expansion section, that would be the Donald E. Hiltz Storm and Access Road construction. And that is an ICIP funded project that is in over 3 million over the course of those 2 years. You'll also see about 7.2% overall for sidewalks. We have 13% in storm sewer, or 14% for this year. That is a rather large investment trying to address the Park Street to Memorial Park and south of Condon. I think Spring Garden Road were probably the 3 hotspots that we've had conversations about. Those together would be 740,000, so a significant investment there. On the streets side, we have 31% of the overall budget. However, next year it's only 4.1%. Moving us down into economic development, those numbers shouldn't look that much unfamiliar. They're kind of the standard, what we try and allocate for downtown improvements on an annual basis. The police service, we have equipment representing about 86%, and the building 14% of the total. We have cars, and we have personal. For this year, for the upcoming year, it is a small amount of non-car related equipment, whereas in 25-26, there's an investment in replacement of personal, what would you call it, Chief? Equipment, personal equipment. And unfortunately, I believe I don't think it's going to do that, Jennifer.
So what you could do is go out of full screen mode.
Yeah.
And you could zoom into your slide itself, so just hit escape.
Okay.
Oh, it'll show.
Nope, it won't do that for me.
I will take control if you like.
Sure. Go back into PowerPoint.
Obviously why I'm not sitting.
Oh, there it was.
Ah, excellent.
Unless you've made any changes to it?
I have not. The rest of it maybe, but we can do this slide and then move,
There you
do a
go.
switcheroo.
Okay.
That works. So bringing us into Parks and Recreation, you can see that they have several categories there as well. About 11% of the funding overall for the plan is for equipment. 19% of that to be spent overall for this year. That mainly would be vehicles. The facilities, 20% of the overall 26 million we plan to spend would be in facilities, 49% for this year's expenditures. And that, for the most part, are items that are carried forward from last year. So the work on the pool and the skate park both had to be deferred over into this year. We also, you'll see green space and trails, it's 3% overall, but 24% next year. And for parks and playgrounds, we have 59% of the overall 26 million, but for next year, it's only the 6%. There's a rather large, you will see, which may jump out, $3 million in 2029. That is for a field upgrade, turf and lighting, which is out at the end, and certainly a high-level estimate at this point.
May I ask a question on
Absolutely.
that? I know it's a ways out, but we presumably would have some sort of grant that, or
Yes.
one would be applied for the 3 million?
That is a perfect segue.
Oh, great.
So, absolutely. So for the 26 million of items that are identified here by category and were detailed in your package over the weekend, I have identified, and we'll go into the next slide in a moment, but I have identified for each of those categories where we are assuming some funding. So for storm sewer work, we have gas tax or sustainability, what was it? SSGF, which was a one-time funding envelope from the province. For active transportation, we're assuming 73.33 from the feds and province. We also have embedded within active transportation the washroom and bike facility. We are hoping that we would be able to secure about 21,000 in grant money from an accessibility point of view to offset our share of those costs. That, if you look at the, just kind of move down to parks and playgrounds, because that's where we were, we are assuming by that point in time that if we were to make that investment, we would be able to get another 73.33% cost share with the feds and the province, and that the balance would be debt at this point, is what's embedded in the plan. We also, of course, through our active transportation, we do receive through the Green Infrastructure Fund, we've assumed that our 26.67% is debt. We've also we've assumed debt, we were very conservative and said debt really where we knew we were gonna secure financing. If we couldn't, otherwise we were gonna use reserves, or we were gonna seek out funding through accessibility or other contributions. We did not assign debt to anything other than those unless debt was assigned last year. So in 23-24, we had more equipment funded through debt. This year, only that carryover would be there.
So, can I ask just a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
Some of these ones that have federal GIF, I'm assuming that's some kind of infrastructure
Green
grant?
infrastructure?
Yeah, green infrastructure, okay. Are they, do any of those have commitment letters or?
Yes.
Okay.
So the Green Infrastructure Fund has been, and I'm looking to my colleague, Director Bell, because he was here then, but we do have a Green Infrastructure Fund grant that goes to 27-28. I believe that we already have a commitment for 3.7 million, 3.669 million, so that's already guaranteed.
So anytime you see their federal GIF, that's, okay, that's good to know.
And the ICIP would be the same, that we've already secured that funding.
Okay, perfect.
In each of the sheets where I identified funding that isn't yet confirmed, it would be that washroom for the accessibility trail that we had at 21,000. We also were hoping to secure grants for the Oakteen washroom and via the Visitor Information Center access support. So we had put in grants at 50%
Okay.
potential. We also know that you'll see we have a playground, KCA playground renewal. We have assumed a potential for 50% contribution,
Okay.
knowing we have a few years to kind of work through that. That would be the same for skate park lighting, 50% seeking contributions from a community or a grant. And the senior ball field that we were hoping for federal provincial that I just mentioned. We also, I know that our Director of Parks and Recreation in the past year has been successful in receiving a COA grants for some activities. So we have assumed the potential for that kind of a grant to offset the Gorge Bridge and the Gorge Trail development.
Okay.
And then when we move into the latter years, we are making assumptions around the work for Main and Park. Those would be trunk roads. And with the pending change in how the province will be funding certain grants with municipality, with the towns, then we would see a 50-50 cost share. It is a first come, first serve.
Right.
So we are hopeful to be able to receive 50% for the full amounts that we've included.
So the, just want to clarify, understand what you said, the Station Lane, bike shelter washroom facility.
Yep,
So the federal one is guaranteed,
correct.
right, but the other one is you're hoping, is that what I took from that or not? Cause I think you have two there listed.
Yes, you are correct. The
Okay.
there's our share, the 26.67% of the
Right,
full.
right.
We would be looking for contributions for
Okay,
elsewhere.
all right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Otherwise, that would end up being debt
Okay,
because we are leveraging that funding by using debt for
right,
that.
okay, all
Does
right.
that answer your question,
Mhm.
Councillor Xavier? Okay, great.
If I could.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we've done going forward is we've used a very narrow lens to what we would like to use that for. And it is those long-term projects where you would have infrastructure. In past years, that was used more for equipment purchases and other purchases. For long-term stability, we felt it better to move towards this model than to use it as a more general financing tool. You are, I think 10% debt servicing charge is where anything underneath that, you're low risk, and we wanted to make sure that we stayed there, so.
And what was the debt service ratio, you know?
It's coming.
Councillor Gerard
You're
is.
anticipating my questions. That's
Okay.
great, Councillor Xavier. No, that's great.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you. And just on the last note about borrowing and stuff, and I'm sure this because it came up at Valley Waste. Are we gonna do reserves for replacing equipment? That's coming up?
That is
Okay.
a recommendation, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
But my question is on storm sewer.
yes.
How do we know what we need for storm sewer if we don't have an overall plan of what, I mean, my fear is we get into a Condon Avenue where we replaced it in 2019 and then we replaced it in 2020. And if you go by the design point, we're gonna have to dig it up, put bigger pipe in it and replace it again. And I don't see it as a good spend of taxpayers' money just to do things on the lower end without going, we have no idea what infrastructure we have or need, or, and I don't know whether this is a money person question or.
Probably could use some assistance from Director Bell to answer that question. I know it was a point of consideration when we had the conversation, so.
Sure.
If you don't mind, Director Bell?
I guess that's fine. Yeah, it's short. So we've had a preliminary design done and a cost estimate for the remaining work to be done on what we're calling Park Street to Memorial Park. That's the section of the, we can call it the Condon Avenue storm drainage system that starts upstream but runs through Condon. The plan is not to replace or dig up the pipe that's on Condon. That was not the recommendation. It would involve excavating the intersection to set a new manhole, likely in the middle of, where Condon meets Park Street, but direct that flow northwest towards across the, sort of the corner of the VIC and down Memorial Park driveway to the south rail ditch. So that's what that cost estimate is for, and that's what's in the budget for this fiscal year. We want to do that, at least we're proposing to do that this current project or this fiscal year. Going forward, yeah, there will be a stormwater management town-wide one done, which will look at, things from one end of the town to the other. That project is deemed high priority, but the intention's not to dig up. The storm sewer was put in 19, not again in 20. In 20, it was water and
Yeah,
sewer
yeah,
and
sorry,
curb
yeah.
and paving, and as a two-phase project. What was done in 19 was deemed an emergency. Gas tax money was used to put that pipe in 2019, and then it was patch paved, and then the street was rebuilt in 2020. But no, that's the plan for what's labeled on the CIP from Park Street to the Harvest, I guess it says Memorial Park. That's what it says.
Yes, it does.
Correct. Thank you,
Correct.
Director. Not sure that answered your question,
It-
Counselor?
It sort of does, but my concern is there's talk of doing storm on Spring Garden. I don't know what the plan is for West Main. There is a pump, and I assume it's a spare as opposed to, but my concern, and the Condon's fine. I'm not an engineer, but the way I read the design point was basically what they said was the size of the pipe is not adequate for a 1 in 100 year. I'm not gonna argue with you on that though, Dave. But my whole thing is, we're talking about spending a fair chunk of change in other spots in town, and without the full stormwater, this is what we need from A to Z. I just don't wanna run into the same thing again where we replace a chunk midway and then find out either something downstream of it is inadequate and it's gonna have to be replaced. So yes, essentially you answered my question. Whether I decide for myself that this is gonna be a good spend of taxpayers' money is.
These projects are all gonna be funded in, as Director Matthews mentioned, through either gas tax or the Sustainability Growth Fund.
Yeah. That's what it was.
The Sustainability Growth Fund is the one that's being used for, it has to be spent in 24-25. We received it last year, has to be spent. It's sort of the, to me, the perfect project to do the Park Street to Memorial Park storm sewer upgrade. So that's, if we don't spend it on something like that, we lose it.
So the money that we got, the 9 million or whatever, or the inclusive, that can be used for anything infrastructure?
You're talking about that's the Donald E. Hill
Donald Hill, yeah.
specific road.
Right.
That
parcel.
money's gotta be spent on that.
Correct.
Yes.
That's what was applied for.
So this is,
This is a different fund
yeah,
entirely.
the growth fund, which was a one-time payment from government the end of last March, needing to be used by the end of this March. The value, because
Next.
it goes into a reserve and you have to put interest against it, it's at around a 602,000 right now, and this project fits that bill. So it would be fully funded from that one time
For next March. you
for
mean?
next March.
Yes.
Sorry, Dave, yes,
Yeah.
March of 2025.
2025, this upcoming fiscal.
Yes, I'm already in next year, I'm budgeting, so my apologies.
Okay, no,
Yeah,
that's
so it would
perfect.
be
Thank-
fully
thank you.
funded at
You're
this
welcome.
point.
Yep.
Can I just speak for a second on the?
Go ahead, CAO.
Yeah, what we have right now is we have that portion that we're recommending that we address. That creates a bottleneck with the work that was done previously. The water is going to have to end up in the channel, as it does now, that gravity's going to work. But but as long as we don't address it, and I'm not an engineer, but I'll leave it to Dave, then you have a real risk of repeated flooding as the water comes down the hill and gets bottlenecked and blows up. I don't see, and I'm not the engineer either, a scenario where you're not going to have to address that as part of an overall plan. We do have, I think it's 558,000, I can't remember the exact amount. That was a one-time grant from the province that this absolutely applies to, and it's administration's recommendation that we go ahead and address that deficiency. Dave and I have been meeting with residents on the street and explaining the work that was done from 2003. You are correct, that is for a spare third pump. Now, we may decide once we have the new pump to send away the pump that wasn't rebuilt to get it rebuilt, so we have 3 good pumps, but there is money in the budget to address that potential deficiency where you may only have 1 pump. So I don't know if that adds anything to what the engineer was.
It does. I guess my overall concern is without having an overall storm plan. I totally agree, something's gotta be done on Condon. The wording, and again, I'm not an engineer, the wording in the document, I read it differently. But in addressing the other money we're gonna spend there and up here, without the overall, this is what you need, that is more my issue. But no, everything's been answered. Fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to clarify, the fund is the same fund. I just added interest to get to 602. It was 5 something we received. Because we have to assign interest individually to those funds when they come from the province, so. Great, okay.
And just of note, last week I was on an FCM webinar, and there's a new fund coming out. It's called Sustainable Infrastructure. And we didn't have all the details, but they did give us the booklet that they're going to be used for the granting. And I have passed that on to staff. And when they send out the recording of that webinar, I will circulate it to council so that you can see the details. It's going to be a very comprehensive fund, and because they are truly talking about the fact that as municipalities in Canada, that we own over 70% of the infrastructure, but we only have access to about 8 cents of every dollar collected in taxes. So that's a huge offset that we're paying for on a daily basis. So I will send that out when we get it, but there is more money coming.
Okay. So I know I provided a fair bit of detail around how we were hoping to finance those individual projects and equipment and infrastructure. So what this chart is trying to do, this pie chart, is to identify where those funding sources are coming from and what we're primarily relying on. So I know that it's hard to see the legend, so the main areas that we are looking to fund over the 5-year plan, we have 24.2% of our funding coming from debt. We have 15.4% coming from capital reserves, 2.5% from equipment reserves, so overall at 17.9% coming from reserves. You'll see provincial grants at 13.2%. The reason that is so high is because that's where we're assuming the 50-50 coming for the trunk roads late in the life of the plan. For 2024-25, you see it's fairly close. However, our ICIP, federal and provincial, form about close to 20% overall. Our reserves are at 12% and our debentures at 22%. And of course, our debentures will be high in the years where we have grants and we're using debentures to cover that close to 27% that we need to fund. So that is how that funding lays out. And based on that, I thought it was important that we talk about what impact that will have on our indices. So if you look, we have about, for 24-25 in particular is where I wanted to start. 30% of our financing will relate to our ICIP grant. 12% of our financing comes from internal reserves, whether it be capital or equipment. What I've identified in this slide is our opening balance that, and for your reference, that opening balance takes our February forecast and says this is where what we think we'll be spending. It then takes out what you've already approved to come from reserves last year for those items that we're carrying into 24-25. And then that's kind of our new starting point for 24-25 new additions. That, you can see in the general capital reserve is around 483,000. Our equipment reserve is rather low at just under 33. And we have Kentville Futures, which is one that's 782,000. And that has come mainly from sales of land that have been put in that segregated there. We, as our CAO had said, we are looking for debt more so than reserves more so to come from reserves than debt. And debt would be for those infrastructure type items. So you can see for projected for 24-25, we would still have about 352,000 in general reserves. Our equipment reserve would be tapped out and would be at a negative 32, and our futures we left at 782. I've then projected that out to 25-26 to see what does that look like. And at 25-26, if we move 282,175 from Kentville Futures up to general, and then put the same amount of money in that you usually put into capital reserves, which is around 413,000 plus another 67 and a 60 for equipment, you would be short 236,000 in general and 162,000 in equipment. Over the life of the plan, it's close to $1 million that we would be short on the reserve side to fund it in the approach that we've discussed today. Yes?
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. So Wanda, just what you just talked about there, I followed it slightly.
Okay,
I'm
it's a lot of information.
I'm a numbers person, so I try and put it all together
Yep.
at the same time. And I can see what you're doing here, how you're getting to what you're getting to, but, so you're talking about essentially what we've had in reserves over the past and what we'll be using on an ongoing basis.
Yep.
Our reserves will be depleted proportionately each year.
Yes. So at the end of this year, you can see that if you net the three together, we're still in $1 million or so. But next year, it would pretty much be gone with no contingency available. So if you wanted to take the Kentville Futures and assign it up above, we're getting close to not having any reserves for the rest of the plan. That assumes what you normally assign from your operating budget into capital going in, and the amount of the capital investment plan coming out. That's the net effect.
And that Kentville Futures piece won't continue to increase right now
No,
because
not
of
at-
the,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, yeah, thank you.
okay?
Yes.
And you will see as we move forward in our recommendations that we feel confident that we should be maintaining some level of reserve for contingency in the event that we get an opportunity, like there's a new grant that we find out about, as long as we can finance 25% of it or 50% of it, or we have a high-risk break fix that we need to do a renewal, it's good to have some money in reserves for those situations. Any further questions on that?
So if that being the case then, and I know that we have to stay within, like that 10% for debt servicing. So that being the case, if we're depleting our reserves quicker, would we not want to then bulk up the financing piece so that we can stretch those reserves? But
That-
maybe we can't do that unless we stay within that 10.
That is absolutely the question we need to ask ourselves,
Yeah.
and we can move right into debt service ratio next if you wish, or CAO had a comment that maybe should
Sorry,
come first.
No. This is the scenario, if we continue as we have been doing and putting a flat amount of money into capital reserves from Operation 400 and some thousand, plus a certain amount for police car that doesn't cover the cost of police cars, plus an amount for public works vehicles that doesn't even come close. We're also making recommendations later on about how much we should be moving over from operations to the capital reserves and other options that may be available. You can use debt, but that also brings with it debt servicing costs, and as you would be aware, the interest rates aren't as favorable as they used to be for debt servicing, so we painted the picture just following status quo, and then we'll lead to where you'll see more recommendations coming later on in our presentation as to how we would see us addressing it. Is that fair?
Okay. So moving right in then to the other financing option that we utilize would be our debt servicing. So this slide is taking you on a journey of where we are for our opening capital debt, where we would expect to be for debt balance at the end of 2029, and then looking at what that ratio is on a per capita basis for debt for our citizens, as well as what our service cost is in relation to the indices that the province uses to evaluate our financial health. If you recall, you will get those FCIs with the house, and this is one of the key components of that. So we are starting out at the end of 2024, we're projecting that we will have a debt balance of just above 5 million. In 2025, with the current capital plan and how it would be financed, you can see it goes to close to 5.8 million. We go up in 27 to 6 million, then back down to 5.6, and then back up to 5.9. Part of that would be we have outstanding debt, as you can see at the beginning of 24 of 5 million. The principal paid on that would be embedded within each, and we do have some falling off, so they will end over the course of this plan, and then we're adding new in. I will note that in 27-28, you see principal paid as being rather large. There is a $270,000 balloon payment that year, and in the past, when we have a balloon payment, we often refinance that over 10 years. And we have been very conservative. So we've assumed for every asset that we plan on purchasing or any infrastructure we plan on developing, we will only finance for 10 years. We have an ability to finance up to 25 years, and we have assets that have a 50-year life. So this, to us, is more of a worst case, bottom line. Rather than look optimistic, we've included interest rates based on the 23 issue that we had, which for the rest of this, the life of this plan would be about 3.6% in interest. And we have just assumed a 10-year, where there are options for longer lives, which will reduce our debt service cost. Okay?
Deputy Mayor.
I did have a note on that 10-year mat for all debts. So have we only ever amortized over the 10 years?
Usually only 10, yeah. But we do have an option to go longer.
Yeah, of course.
But our debt was not, I think in the past, our capital budgets were less dollars
Fairly
value,
nominal, yeah.
and so proportionally, the debt value wouldn't be as high
Right.
to actually find the principal and interest within our tax base.
So this, as you
Yeah.
said, would be yeah.
It's very conservative.
It is very conservative, but I mean, at the end of the day, if we, over the ensuing few years,
Yep.
to Councillor Gerard's point about stormwater management, if there was
Yep.
more that needed to be done for that, we could stretch out the amorts on some of that debt. Yeah,
So it
okay.
gives you that flexibility
For
without
sure.
making assumptions on behalf of council and how
Yes.
you would like to stretch that.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I would add on
CEO?
why we went so conservative is we know we're doing, in all likelihood, we're doing a stormwater master plan. Those projects aren't in here, so you're going to have to look for
Yeah.
financing for those. So if you don't have any capacity within the bubble, if you're already maxed out with 20-year borrowing, you have nowhere to go. So we took the position that we were gonna take very conservative views of growth and numbers, and then that creates some capacity when we do get plans down the road that we can build them in. So that's why we arrived at the path we arrived on.
So you can see from the ratio point of view, we're at low risk if we are less than 10% debt service cost. And throughout the course of the whole plan, we are under the 10%. In '28, it is at 9.4, but that is that balloon payment kind of driving that. So green throughout the whole course of the plan, using very conservative approach. So that is, yep, that is all that I had there. I will say the per capita, though, is from 2021, and it is 6,630 residents is what we have there. So just in case that was a number you were wondering about. And we do have throughout the course of the plan, it is around 60,000 a year, except for 27, 28, that we have a 374,000 drop-off of debt from the past. So that remains fairly stable. If we look, the other piece that we've talked about, I know operating doesn't seem to naturally make sense to come into play here. However, we do need to finance our principal and debt repayments through our operating fund. So there is another indicator that is out there, which is our operating reserve ratio. And that indicator is taking our total operating reserve balance and dividing it by our expenses, including interest and principal repayments. So if we assume everything else remains the same and we're gonna balance our revenue and to our expenses, so we've incorporated a low growth rate on our expense side, and keep our reserve balances stable. 'Cause last year, in the last few years, we have added to our operating reserve and then moved some operating reserve money in. So we've kind of gone one way, gone the other, and it was a net negative of about $40,000 within the plan. We've assumed that it won't be negative, it'll be zero. So we've just left it the same, which we know is conservative. In this ratio, low is considered greater than 20%. So you want to have your operating reserves be able to cover 20% or more of your annual operating costs, including your principal and interest, to be low risk. That is something we probably can't attain in the short term, but moderate would be something that I think would be achievable. We are throughout the plan, we would be in the moderate, just at around the 10% for the first 3 years, but then we move under 10%, staying within 9.5% to 10% for the last 3 years of the plan, unless we are adding more to our reserves on our operating side to offset that principal debt repayment increases that we have in the plan. It will help, I think, as we move into the operating budget to know that how these two pieces connect. So I thought it might be of value for you today.
Councillor Gerard.
Just a question from a dummy. When we look at the indicators for the debt service, and then we look at the indicators for that. When you span them out over the next 5 years, are you using, and what I'm trying to grasp is with the increase in property valuation services, is there a projection on that side as well? Or is
Yes.
it just today's numbers, here's where it is?
The reserve, we said, we're gonna assume we're not gonna put anything in or take anything out for the operating reserve for the next 5 years. From a growth rate, we do have included a 3%, 3, 2, and 1 increase. So I have estimated already, based on if we have, the assumption is everything remaining equal, just with the change in assessment values, what does 24, 25 revenue look like? So that's what's embedded in there based on what we've received information to date. for 25, 26 through to 28, 29, we have assumed 3%, 3%, 2 and 1. Which seem fairly conservative based on what we've received in the past, but we do know it's kind of a volatile housing market.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we don't want to rely on lifts that might not be achievable. So that's what we included for revenue growth. We assume that council will want our revenue and expenditures to equal. So we've assumed the same growth rate in expenditures. And then the principal and interest repayments would be based on the debt within this capital investment plan.
Thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yep,
Okay.
wonderful.
So Councillor Gerard, you will recall when we did asset management training, and they talked about that 4%, that if your revenue was not increasing by at least 4% per year, that you were gonna be behind the 8 ball, so, yeah.
So our CAO has said, we've tried to be conservative, knowing that if we want to make we want to make decisions around this and move, kind of shift some things around, that there's some maneuverability that we as leadership and council have to address some issues as they arise. Okay. I have gone through and looked at what, if we were trying to achieve that goal of being, at least 10% and above, between 10% and the 20%, we're gonna need to have operating reserves of about, to keep it at 10, we're gonna need 1.6 million in operating reserves. And at the end of the plan, I have about 1.5 million. If we wanted to get to the 20%, which is at the upper level of the moderate, we'd need 3.2 million in reserves. So it is based on the assumptions, it is a fair increase we would need to have to get ourselves just to the top of moderate. But it's something that we can think about as we look at our operating budget around how we might make what those transfers might look like.
All right, before, I think we're ready for recommendations, but before we go to recommendations, does anyone have any specific questions on any of the line items or anything that you've read within this? And Councillor Gerard, I see your light is on.
Me again.
Go ahead, please.
So I was going through and the cenotaph, the $10,000, is that just the steps?
Steps in the railing.
And the railing? I was up today and I took pictures of it.
Yeah.
Can we, increase, because doing the steps and the railing is wonderful because it's a safety hazard.
Yes.
But it's all an eyesore. That should be a beautiful monument. It's missing a screw, some of the cement and stuff around it. So I understand it's in this to get fixed, but I don't know why we wouldn't go whole hog and double it and, put all new cement and everything. That's my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Worship. Can I direct this question to Director Bell?
Sure.
So, Director Bell, I know you and I in the past, and other folks on this council have talked about upgrades coming down the road maybe in Deer Haven with respect to, I think you had referred to it as a pencil tank on a higher elevation. I'm just wondering, and I know that that's not in the plan for the 24-25 year, but is that something that presumably could be integrated with the Donny Hills connector and some of the upgrades done there once it extends over a little bit more?
Sure. I notice that TV's gonna turn off shortly, Jennifer.
And my apologies, folks, this isn't embedded in this plan. It's something that I think we've spoken about at council before.
Two things, I guess, Deputy Mayor. That would be the water capital budget, so not this budget at all.
Oh,
So
okay.
this is just town, so there's a sewer budget and a water budget to
Okay.
come.
Okay.
They wouldn't fall under the town capital
Under
budget.
capital, okay, my
So
apologies.
there's capital water, but that's a separate budget. that
Okay.
We will set in water commission, May, I believe, Mayor Snow.
Okay.
Yes.
That, we're still working on the water capital budget. That is, it would be in an outlier year, maybe year 5,
Okay.
probably at best.
Okay.
For a tank up on the higher elevation of Prospect. It isn't part of the D.E. Hiltz Road project, though that wasn't part of the application. That was just for the infrastructure and the replacement of the water tank in the business park. That tank is to be replaced under that ICIP program, but not a tank up on the higher elevation of Prospect.
Okay.
That answers your question.
Yep, it answers my question, and I apologize for that. I should have known that wouldn't fall under this capital budget.
Not a problem.
Thanks.
I meant to clarify that originally. So this is only the town general
Yes.
capital, water and sewer to come. Thank you.
Councillor
for-
York.
Thank you. Councillor Gerard jogged my memory, so if I might ask or direct the question through Director Langell. The stair repair, does that also include an option for making that space more accessible?
Whatever council would want, we can, we can look at.
Excellent answer.
Our proposal was just to replace the existing hazard in place.
Okay.
That has been brought to our attention several times, so, we were being cognizant of the financial ask of what we have that we are offering for the year, so, we kept it at a modest 10,000 to replace the railing in the stairwell.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Huntley.
Thank you. I know under equipment, it says Aberdeen traffic lights, Belcher traffic lights, 25, 26, 26, 27. And I'm wondering, I know what traffic lights are, but what comes under that whole cost? Is it just the light itself? With the, like, I guess why I'm looking at it, because I know we talked about, let's say a few meetings ago, was Chester Avenue having some lights. Whether we do a traffic study and then there's light, I just wondering if there's any mention or any talks about it.
I guess to answer the first part of your question, it depends on the intersection, like the Belcher and now Bridge Street intersection. Those are loop detector sensed, sort of an older school method of sensing traffic, and that's, they're cuts in the pavement where there's a wire and it senses a car sitting there waiting, so it detects a vehicle and changes the red to green or green to red, so on.
Okay.
Aberdeen and Maine, or Webster Aberdeen and then on to Maine, that double set, they're just timered. They're just straight timered, and then at nighttime they go to the flashing red, that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah.
The Chester Avenue, certainly would require a traffic
Yep.
analysis, counts and
Thank
how
you.
many left turns and what the level of service is. Because if you add a traffic, and there were traffic lights 30 years ago
Yes.
at the bottom of Chester. But in doing so, you certainly reduce the level of service on Main Street, because then you're backing up Main Street
Gotcha.
and waiting longer. But
Thank you.
a study would tell that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Zabian.
Thank you. If I can direct these to Director Langell. Just a couple questions. The bike rack and benches, I guess, that we're gonna go on Station Lane or wherever they were gonna go by the trails, whatever they were budgeted around, or maybe last year.
Sorry.
The
I only
bike-
heard- I only
yeah.
heard part of that, Counselor. Could you
Yeah,
repeat that?
the bike racks and benches, I think that they were budgeted around 26,000.
The bike racks.
Yeah, I don't have that thing in the big document in front of me. Let me
I think there's
find
two
it.
different things there, because I think under Lindsay's.
I got it right here.
Community
Yeah.
Economic Development, that's one budget that may fall under.
Downtown betterment, bike racks and benches.
Yeah.
Public art project.
That's all CED, Community Economic Development. I don't have a great breakdown of that. I can look into the list. Counselor? And could have asked Lindsay to come. I don't.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind more information on that, because I don't see any grant opportunities there. That looks like we're paying the complete,
That is correct.
correct? Yeah, I
Yeah.
wouldn't mind more information on
Yeah.
that. And the other, just want to confirm I read these right, because don't have that. I love paper. I hate sorry, Jennifer. I hate PowerPoint. So the, where were the other ones here? The skate park shelter, you might know the answer to that, Director. There's financing, there's some grant money for that.
So that would, I'm just wondering which one exactly that is.
I know, I'm trying to dig it up here again.
Yeah, If it says grant, if we have it secured, then yes, if is this the one with the washroom?
No, this is the one at the skate park.
Oh, at the
So-
shade.
shade, yeah.
Just one moment. I have too much paper. That's not just, on the tip of my-
Yeah, did you see it there? Oh.
Oh, is it? Thank
Hmm?
you. Just trying to go to my slides.
Number 37.
Yep, and that is capital reserves.
Okay,
That's
so that
correct.
one we're paying as well.
Yeah,
And the lighting, I believe, was 50, wasn't it?
the lighting last year was in the budget at 50,000.
Okay,
Certainly, and Director Langell can correct me if I'm wrong here, but we, going out and looking to do that work, the cost doubled.
okay,
So our hope is that we can still fund 50,000 ourselves and find grants for 50,000, but we don't have those secured right now. That would be part of the unsecured, seeking out funding sources in the community or through
so this
another
might,
grant.
this might be a stupid question, I guess, because
Yeah.
if we don't get can the project still go ahead if we don't get the funding, or we need the funding
It'll be contingent
on the funding,
It's a
right?
$100,000 project.
Right, okay,
So
okay,
So any areas, our assumption is any areas where we're seeking contributions and we can't get a contribution, we would need to come back if it was a high-risk
okay,
area that we needed to spend the money, because we'd have to come back to ask council for permission to either get more debt or to use a reserve if reserve is available.
okay,
Otherwise, we would do what we did last year presumably and defer that and bring it back in the budget the next year with the new kind of parameters around how we might finance it and
okay.
fund.
Yeah,
Is
and I'm
that
not
fair?
saying these projects aren't important or
No.
valid, it's just sometimes, when I look at the problems that we've had with water management and stuff, sometimes we have to look at our own infrastructure and maybe concentrate on that. And, you know, when I kind of equate it to your house, if you have a flood and your living room's destroyed, are you gonna fix your living room, or are you gonna go put a new kitchen, right? Sometimes you gotta look at that stuff, but by all means, they're all great projects, and
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it's certainly why Engineering Public Works, that group, is 89% of our
Mhm.
overall
Yeah.
plan because of that risk mitigation that you mentioned.
Yeah,
The other thing we need to consider is that we're actually doing our capital budget earlier than normal.
Yes.
So we're not aware of the Build Nova Scotia, the Invest Nova Scotia, and the ACOA grants.
Yeah.
So on Thursday, again, I was at the meeting with the Valley Wren where these entities are there. And they were saying that they do have new money coming, they just don't know how much or what it's going to be available for. So we have a really great team of grant writers here, and so no doubt, if we're looking for money, they'll know where to find it. Councillor Gerard?
My question was, when we talk about, like fixing up the VIC, the active transportation, and making it accessible, and when it says that, is this a mandate, yes or no? Are we talking about the 2030 government mandate that said, like, for example, they say town hall's not accessible to the
Yes.
2030 mandate? And my question is how, knowing a little bit about building codes and stuff like that and how they change, are we comfortable spending, and this is only, I think, 10,000 or something like that? It's not a lot of money. Having said that, and it's not in the budget, but renovating town hall is a huge expense. Are we confident that what we do in 2024 will be compliant in 2030?
Looking to my colleagues, but I believe yes.
So
I'm
we
seeing
don't
nods.
have any money in for renovations to the town
No.
hall in this
Yeah.
budget. We did agree that we would put in the operational budget to have a plan done as to what a newly renovated town hall would look at. The understanding was that would be a starting point for the next council, which certainly will have to deal with leading up to the 2030 mandate. But you want to be taking steps where you can, and if you can upgrade some of your buildings for what I'll call low-hanging fruit at $10,000. I think we should be leveraging it.
Yep.
Some of the bigger projects, at least providing a starting point for the next council,
Yep.
can be of benefit, and I believe that's where we landed in the workshop, but if I'm wrong, please correct me.
And just as a follow-up to a totally different subject, the 20,000 for connecting the trails between McDougall Heights and Bonna Vista and what, how are we connecting those? Like, are we literally trying to connect McDougall Heights to Bonna Vista and the trail, or how does that work? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, it's just connecting to our existing trails. So those will provide an opportunity for those communities to access the trail with more of an accessible standard. This would also be in partnership with the Annapolis Valley Trail Biking Association. So it's a close partnership that we're growing with as well going forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one, and I'm not sure who I would direct this to, but I guess collectively, would we say that this capital investment plan would marry up with our asset management plan? I know it's been a while since we've kind of looked at that collectively as a council, but I'm just wondering if that sort of formed part of the discussions.
Certainly, yes, we do use the asset management plan to pick projects through the heat map and the consequence of failure and what's the other one, Mayor Snow? Consequence of the risk and failure sort of consequences. You know, if a major water line, I'm using water line incorrectly here as well, because this is not a water budget,
I know,
but
I get confused.
the one I think of, you know, is if a main water artery goes down, you know, that is, the consequence of that failure is very large, so it gets weighted more heavily. If it's Park Street or one of our transmission lines or something along that nature, can use that for any of the other types of assets. But we do use the plan, and we, you know, they've identified that is the AIM network when they did our asset management plan, certainly the immediate risks and priorities, and we do use that. Of course, we also use things that come up that may not be in that plan, like, you know, from other failures that have happened within the last couple of years that we need to prioritize to make those projects, you know, bring them to the top of the list, whether it's stormwater management or that sort of thing. So we certainly do use it,
Okay.
Deputy Mayor.
Okay. The second one sort of pertains to page 4 of the document that we all reviewed this weekend, where we talk about, you know, the portion of the capital budget funded directly from municipal reserves, and then talking about is not keeping pace with the needs. And I think that we talked about that a little bit earlier in your presentation. So I'm just wondering if those discussions will form part of this discussion at this juncture, or if those would be for a later meeting, Your Worship,
CEO.
or CEO.
I can answer it, I don't know if Wanda
No, go
wants to,
ahead.
but yes, absolutely, it will form part of the discussions on the operating budget, and even,
Okay.
there's some components of this where we talk about adjusting some of the reserves, but on a go-forward basis, there has to be more of an emphasis on your long-term capital needs on your operating two reserves. We have some unfunded catch-up this year with salaries that weren't budgeted 100%. We have a couple of others to stabilize our platform in the operating, and then administration would be looking to at least take a percentage of any future lifts and allocate those to capital, so we start to build that fund. Because it has been flatlined for so long, again, we've lost on the incremental creep. So there's a couple of steps here that we're suggesting, but there will be a bigger discussion in operations, and administration will be on the side of stable and growing funding for the capital load of operations to make sure that we can meet the requirements we know are coming down the road, be they stormwater or be they facilities. I know there's work that will have to be done in the arena and other facilities going forward, so.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Councillor Zabian.
Thank you. Director Matthews, just wondering, since this fiscal's just about over in a couple of days, do you know how much of last year's capital budget was exhausted or spent? I know some of it's carried over, but I know things get dropped sometimes, and
Yeah, I can look that up. All of so the forecast that we put forward at the end of February's March's council, which would have been related to the end of February, we've taken all of those projects and projected them forward. And I'm gonna say it's around 3 million, but I can
Okay.
look it up.
Okay.
And that has been embedded in here, and then the balance carried forward.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I have it referred right here, I can find you the exact
Okay.
number. I believe. Or if there's another question, I can look while we're.
Counselor York?
Thank you. I'm going to direct this to Director Bell. Sorry, you were getting up and down. I noticed in our budget on page 23, it talks specifically about the Apple Tree Lane Stormwater and Sanitary Sewer Division. But I'm wondering if in your planning, the areas of town that have those existing mixed systems are going to be addressed in a similar way. So specifically, I'm thinking of my old neighborhood of Masters Avenue and like Orchard, where those two systems intermingle. Wondering if there's a plan to separate them all out.
There are, and, yeah, I'm thinking, your old ones,
Yeah, they are old.
they are. I don't think there's a great deal of combined sewer on, we've done, over the last really 25 to 30 years, since we've had, we've been, I guess, been using the regional sewer system as our treatment facility for 47 or 8 years now, and paying to treat wastewater. So we're that much more vigilant and not wanting to put storm sewer down the wastewater stream, because you would pay to treat, millions of gallons of stormwater a day, if certainly during wet weather events. The one that's mentioned on Apple Tree Lane it's been identified that there's some storm sewer going into the sanitary sewer system, and we want to separate that out so it goes into the storm. I'm not aware of many other locations. There's certainly are catch basins that perhaps would enter the sanitary system, but they are, to my understanding, few and far between now. They've been separated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have access to that directory here.
Okay.
So I'm looking elsewhere to see if I can find it. If not, I'll have to share it to you. Yeah, yeah. It hasn't changed since the amount that would have been in my capital report in February. We're not projecting anything different, and I just can't seem to find it in the packages. So there's been no significant change at this point.
All right, Director, you've got some recommendations for us. So the way that we've structured our typical motion, I'm going to say, covers off your first three. So the capital budget, the ensuing years, and the previously budgeted amounts?
Yep.
Yes.
So what we are recommending is that we are seeking approval for the 24-25 budget, which would be new spend at $4,872,425.
No,
Would you-
keep going.
Keep
Yep.
going?
Yep.
We want to confirm with council that the 23-24 carry forward budget, which was previously approved at $2,854,400, can move forward, and we would utilize the funding sources according to last year's plan, not our approach for this year. So what you agreed to last year, just confirming we can continue on that path. We are seeking approval in principle for the remaining $18,515,869 in projected capital expenditures for 25-26 and beyond.
And that's good. We can stop there.
We can stop there,
Yeah,
then I
that
can
gives
go
us,
back.
that gives us our first motion. The council approved the 24-25 Town of Kentville Capital Investment Plan, capital budget, in the amount of $4,872,425, including the funding sources, and further confirm the previously approved 23-24 carry forward of $2,854,400 for incomplete projects. And further, that council approves the future years 25-26 to 28-29 in the principal in the amount of $18,500,000 $15,869, including its funding sources.
So moved.
Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor York, thank you. So it's been moved and seconded that council approve the 24-25 Town of Kentville Capital Investment Plan in the amount of $4,872,425, including the funding sources, and further confirm the previously approved 23-24 carry forward of $2,854,400 for incomplete projects, and further that council approves the future years 25-26 to 28-29 in the principal in the amount of $18,515,869, including the funding sources. Is there any further discussion on this matter? There being no further, oh, Councillor Xavier?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, personally myself, I need a little time to digest this a little more. That's just me. I don't know what the rest of council's thinking, but I don't like to vote on something so quickly, and some of this information we just fell into our laps a little while ago. Like the numbers, and I kind of like to go over them a little more in detail. Myself personally, I'd like to see it kind of maybe tabled for, but if we have another special meeting, or that's just my opinion, it'd be the will of council, but thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to make a comment. I feel it's a very good budget. It's a very comprehensive budget. I felt the information was good. I felt the questions were answered. I mean, everybody processes things differently. Everybody needs different amounts of time, and I certainly understand that. But as it goes for capital budgets, I thought it was probably one of the best that I've seen come forward. So that's my comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any further discussion? Are you ready for the question? The question is, council approved the 24-25 Town of Kentville Capital Investment Plan in the amount of $4,872,425, including the funding sources, and further confirmed the previously approved 23-24 carry forward of $2,854,400 for incomplete projects, and further that council approves the future years 25-26 to 28-29 in principal in the amount of $18,515,869, including the funding sources. Voting is now open. Funding is now closed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. All right, Director, you have some more recommendations for us?
Yes. Further, we are seeking authority to senior leadership to really investigate some items that may require early tendering out of the 25-26. In particular, the areas that I'm thinking of are areas where we have a capital grant that may expire within 24 months that may be helpful for us to investigate and go out to tender, say, in January of next year. And so we're seeking approval from council to allow us to do that investigation and just bring for your awareness areas where it might be beneficial to do so for your decision at a later date.
All right, thank you very much, Director and Council. As the CAO is our only staff, the motion will read that Council authorize the CAO to investigate and bring forward to Council 25-26 capital expenditures for items that would benefit from early tendering process. Councillor Gerard, thank you. And Deputy Mayor, I've got you for the second. Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that council authorize the CAO to investigate and bring forward to council 25-26 capital expenditures for items that would benefit from early tendering process. Is there any discussion on this matter? There being no discussion, are you ready for the question? The question is that council authorize the CAO to investigate and bring forward to council 25-26 capital expenditures for items that would benefit from early tendering process. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. And we have another one.
We do. So throughout the course of our conversation, we've talked about where our reserve balances are and where we anticipate they'll be at the end of the plan. So we are further asking to identify new opportunities for capital reserve renewal to ensure that we have sufficient balances available to us at the end of the capital investment plan. And as indicated on, within one of the first few slides, you can see at 25-26, which is year 2, we are in a negative position. In particular, we are seeking to increase the annual reserve allocation from operating for $14,000 for each marked police car and $155,000 for transportation equipment, so that will offset the expenses throughout the course of this plan. And we are seeking to secure or provide funding for allocations totaling close to $964,000 to bring the capital reserve unfunded projects to nil at the end of this plan. And we are also seeking to maintain the $500,000 contingency on Kentville future reserves rather than deplete it to offset some of the $963,000.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Director. So our motion is that council approve the plan for capital reserve renewal to ensure sufficient balances are available to fund the capital investment projects projected capital purchases from year 2 onward, and further increase annual reserve allocation from operating in the amount of, I've got 14,000 written, is that right?
169,000.
Okay, wow,
It's the two combined.
okay. And a total of 169,000, and further secure funding allocations totaling $963,937 to bring general capital reserve unfunded projects to nil at the end of the capital investment plan, and further maintain a $500,000 contingency in Kentville Futures capital reserve. Councillor Zabian, thank you. Councillor Gerard, thank you. So it's been moved and seconded that council approve the plan for capital reserve renewal to ensure sufficient balances are available to fund CPI project capital purchases from year 2 onward, and further increase annual reserve allocation from operating in the amount of $169,000, and further secure funding allocations totaling $963,937 to bring general capital reserve unfunded projects to nil at the end of the CPI, and further maintain a $500,000 contingency of Kentville Futures capital reserves. Discussion on this matter, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's more with the verbiage, so secure or provide for funding allocations totaling just north of 900,000. Maintain, so that's, it's to bring these things back, correct? Not to make these things, with the intent, in the spirit of, correct?
CAO.
Yes,
Please.
there are a number of tools that we can use, but there's a shortfall of about $963,000 that you could allocate more to capital reserve. You could potentially look at using debt where it makes sense more. I think the next item on the council agenda would be a tool that could also be used if that money were directed to capital reserve. But whatever tool council uses, by the end of year 5, that deficit has to be addressed. So it's just recognizing that it has to be addressed.
Understood. Thank you.
All right. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Are you ready for the question? The question is that council approve the plan for capital reserve renewal to ensure sufficient balances are available to fund CIP projects capital purchases from year 2 onward, and further increase annual reserve allocation from operating in the amount of $169,000, and further secure funding allocations totaling $963,937 to bring the general capital reserve unfunded projects to nil at the end of the capital investment plan, and further maintain a $500,000 contingency in the Kentville Futures capital reserve. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. Thank you. And that fulfills our recommendations from the capital investment plan. Director Matthews, thank you very much. I will reiterate what Deputy Mayor said, one of the best capital investment plans we've seen. And to staff, our directors, thank you so very much for the work. We know that you were burning the midnight oil, and we truly appreciate this. And further, we appreciate you providing with a plan that we can see the way ahead and that we can make the right decisions going forward to ensure that we can maintain not only the capital investment, but the benefits that we see from that in service provision to the town of Kentville. So thank you. Thank you.
And if I could add to that, as your one employee of council, most of you have heard me say before, but good people make us look good, and certainly whether that's Wanda and her team, whether that's the directors and their team. In my 27 years, this is, as I said today, the most comprehensive capital budget that I've ever seen delivered, and it was well integrated too, to make sure that that council were aware of all the subcomponents that went into it. So.
All right.
Took a team.
Excellent, excellent, gotta love it. All right, CAO, are you taking us through our next piece of new business with the D-transfer tax?
Thanks for saving me a lot of time.
Over to you.
So it is well served to speak to this after our discussion on the capital budget. So if you remember, back on January 29th, my first day in the seat, there was a January 17th memo that was written by Louis Coutinho on the D-transfer tax, and it referenced the potential use of it as a tool to look at funding our long-term capital, and it referenced the fact that us in Kings County were the only two municipalities in Nova Scotia that didn't utilize it. We just went through a capital budget process where we recognized that we have $963,000 in unfunded. Historically, there's been an argument that the D-transfer tax will cause people to choose to move down the road. There's not many places now where you can move down the road, and both Berwick and Wolfville are within Kings County. Both have D-transfer taxes, and I'm yet to hear any member of council or any member of staff for those organizations say that it was a bad thing to go down this path. D-transfer tax for the town of Kentville, conservatively at 1.5%, would generate between $400,000 and $600,000 a year, looking at historics that go back on sales for 10 years, I believe.
Did a 5, 10, and a 20.
Yeah, and that also doesn't take into account escalation in pricing, because at a percentage, as housing costs increase, the amount of money it generates raises. Staff are recommending that we move forward with the steps to implement a D-transfer tax at 1.5%, and that the proceeds of that D-transfer tax go into the capital reserve for use on capital projects at the discretion of council moving forward. I would note in my report that I referenced that the D-transfer tax is a one-time tax sourced and applied at the time of purchase and sale of new properties. Really, the word new should be struck from that statement, because if you sell a house that is 30 years old, the D-transfer tax applies. It was an oversight of one word. So happy to answer any questions or take any comments council may have.
All right, CAO, based on that recommendation, what we're going to do at this meeting is whether or not we approve the implementation as detailed in the report. But at the next meeting, I would, if there is a will to go this way, then we would hold first reading at our next meeting, so the meeting subsequent to this, as you wish. Deputy Mayor, I see you've got your hand up.
Through the chair. So I have two questions. So the first question is, do we have to go with 1.5? I think 1.5 is the maximum. Perhaps we could look at 1. That was just a thought. Secondly, to direct that revenue, what reserves can it go to? What restraints are there? Maybe there are no restraints on this money. I'm assuming it all has to go into a reserve and not just straight flow through to revenue. Thank you.
So to your first question, even though staff is recommending the 1.5%. We included the numbers for 1%. It is certainly within council's purview to set the rate at anything between 0.25 and 1.5%. To the second question, we are proposing that council put restrictions on the funds through policy to make sure it goes into the capital reserve. There are no, in the Municipal Government Act, there are no limitations. You could just put it into general operations if you wanted. We would like to, administration's recommendation is to direct that if you're going down this path, then also pass supporting policy if the bylaw is approved to ensure that it goes into the capital reserve to be used on capital. Again, we know we have stormwater components coming. We know we have building renovations coming. We know we're looking at such things as a regional recreation center. It would be good to take advantage of the opportunity in the administration's recommendation to channel that money directly into capital reserve.
Can that ever change?
A new council could certainly change the policy if they so desired. That would be an open process.
But once it's directed to capital reserves, regardless if it's a new council or not, can that change on a per annum basis? Let's say 5 years down the road, a council wants it to go to general revenue, or is it once it's established, or do you have to go to another first and second reading to?
So if the money goes into the special reserve, any monies that are in the special reserve have to be used for capital.
Okay.
You cannot apportion monies from capital reserve and then use it for operations. But if a new council wanted to change the policy, then they would have the ability to reallocate to other channels. That would be to council's privy, and that would be an open process at an open council meeting where that decision would have to be made. Administration couldn't, or individual councilors or the mayor couldn't just direct it go down a different path.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gerard.
It sounds like, because the deed transfer would be on the property, is it on vacant land as well, or just a property with a dwelling on it, or a building on it?
I wasn't ready for that question.
I think
It's on every property.
There you go.
So is there a benefit to the person paying it? Like, it sounds to me like when you sell a car, every time you sell a car, there's tax on it, and it's just basically, I don't wanna say a tax grab and make everyone in this room look greedy, but.
So it is a different catchment than your property taxes. So the way I've always looked at deed transfer tax is it's a cost of buy-in to the existing infrastructure in the community that you're moving to. Having said that, if you're moving from one street in Kentville to another street in Kentville, then you wouldn't have that buy into the infrastructure. So it's not perfect, but it isn't just using all of the known expenditures and putting it on the general tax rate. It does have a different catchment than who are the traditional property taxes payers in Kentville, if that makes sense.
Yeah, will it eliminate, so I know in new subdivisions and maybe it doesn't exist, maybe I don't know. But there used to be like a curb fee. So if you bought the newly developed land up above someone else that hasn't been developed before, the town, is that eliminated, or is that on top as well?
That would be a decision of council. They're separate, but they could be tied together. The challenge that you run into is we know that we're going to be dealing with not just the capital expenditures that were detailed in this plan, but we know there's going to be additional expenditures in stormwater. We know there's going to be additional expenditures in upgrade, whether it's for accessibility or in the arena's case, you have a facility that is 40-some years old that needs some expenditures. So what administration is recommending is pass the policies to make sure that it is put into the capital reserve. Those monies can only be used on capital. If a future council, and it would be the privy of a future council, just the same as it would have been your privy when you first came on council, wanted to go in a different direction, they would be able to amend the, actually, I stand corrected. If it was set up by policy that goes into special reserves, they would be able to amend the policy.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Based on the recommendation, the motion at this meeting would be that council approves the implementation of deed transfer tax as detailed in the attached report. Someone prepared to move that? Councillor Gerard, thank you. And a seconder? There's no seconder?
I'll second it.
Okay. So it has been moved and seconded that council approves the implementation of deed transfer tax as detailed in the attached report. Is there any further discussion, or do we go to the question? The question is,
Just
Councillor Zabian?
Or let CEO go first,
Okay.
yeah.
on point of process, it's a bylaw. It would still have to go back to first reading of bylaw, advertisements, and then coming forward for second reading. So nothing that you do here is absolutely locking you in. That is a process that will begin with first reading and advertising and going to second reading.
Exactly.
Sorry, that
No,
was my interpretation.
okay.
I heard what your worship said when you were introducing the process, and I understood from what you said earlier that this motion isn't intended to be first reading of the bylaw, but now I'm a little unclear.
This motion is not, this is to get a feel of the room, and then when we go into our next meeting, it would be on the table as first reading.
So you may want to give consideration to the wording of the motion, just because it is, like, the motion would be to move forward to first reading in a bylaw to implement, I believe. I could stand corrected on that, but I don't want to lock council into the belief that they've implemented something when we still have a process to follow
Okay.
to get to the end.
Okay, it's the implementation, that's the word that I have to change. So we're approving, is it, do I want to say, because there still needs to be further work. What we've been provided is not the draft bylaw.
So
Like, it's not the Kentville bylaw.
At the next council meeting, the draft bylaw will be brought forward. It will be in addition to the agenda, and it will be
Okay.
brought forward for first reading. First reading is generally done for any bylaw. Any debate happens at second reading, so there's an advertisement process and a waiting process. And then at second reading, there would be debate and a final decision that if council adopted it at that point, that would be where they would commit to it.
Okay, so what if we said it has been moved and seconded that council approves moving forward on deed transfer tax through bylaw process? That doesn't lock us into anything, because we still have a process that's very square box that we have to go through.
So you get locked in at second reading and adoption at second reading.
Yeah, moving forward on deed transfer tax. By bylaw process, or through bylaw process.
I'm fine on the amendment on the
Okay.
second.
Okay. All right, so it's been moved and seconded that council approves moving forward on deed transfer tax through the bylaw process. So the question is that council approves moving forward on deed transfer tax through the bylaw process. No, because that could, yes. We're not locked into anything. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. So council, with your approval, based on the outcome of this vote, the first reading of deed transfer tax will be added to the council meeting agenda under new business. Is there any opposition to this? There being no opposition, thank you very much. All right, we are late on our time. We do have a part of the agenda for public comment, if there's any comment on capital budget. All right, moving on. If there's no further business, this meeting is adjourned, and the time is 5:40. Council, we need a 5-minute break to take